Three sisters from 1903 were supposed to look identical, but now Lydia's eyes have rolled back completely white, and her neck, God, her neck is glowing like ice under moonlight. Clara's grip on my hand is so tight I can feel her bones grinding against mine, but I won't let go. I can't let go. Because if we lose her to whatever's clawing its way through that mark on her throat, she'll be gone forever, just like all the others. The temperature just dropped another 10 degrees, and Professor Grayson is shouting words I don't understand, but Lydia, she's still fighting. She's still here. We can save her. We have to. In the dusty archives of Blackwood Manor, there sits a photograph that makes everyone who sees it stop and stare. Three young women stand side by side. Their faces mirror images of each other. They wear matching white dresses with high collars and delicate lace. Their hair is styled the same way, pulled back in soft waves. At first glance, you might think you're looking at triplets, but look closer at the middle sister's neck, and you'll notice something that changes everything. There, just above her collar, is a dark mark. It's not a shadow from the camera or a flaw in the old photograph. It's something else entirely, something that shouldn't be there. The mark looks almost like a small handprint, but the fingers are too long and thin to be human. When you zoom in on this detail, the perfect similarity between the three sisters suddenly feels wrong. Very wrong. These are the Whitfield sisters, Clara on the left, Lydia in the middle, and Rose on the right. The photograph was taken in the summer of 1903 at their family estate, Blackwood Manor. The manor stood on a hill overlooking the small town of Millbrook, surrounded by thick woods that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Clara was 22 when this photograph was taken. She was known for her gentle nature and love of books, spending most of her days in the manor's vast library. Clara had a way of making everyone around her feel calm and safe. She possessed an almost maternal instinct toward her younger sisters, always watching over them with protective care. Lydia, the middle sister, was 20 years old and had always been the most curious of the three. She asked questions that made adults uncomfortable and seemed to know things she shouldn't know. As a child, she would disappear for hours, exploring every corner of Blackwood Manor. Lydia had an unusual habit of staring at empty spaces, as if she could see something others couldn't. Rose, the youngest at 18, was quiet and observant. She noticed details that others missed, and had a way of being in the right place at the right time. Rose could sense when something was wrong before anyone else noticed. Despite her youth, Rose possessed a wisdom that often surprised adults. The three sisters were inseparable. They shared everything with each other, from secrets to dreams to fears. They had their own language of looks and gestures that no one else could understand. When one sister was sad, the others would feel it too. This connection would prove crucial in the dark days ahead. The Whitfield family had always been different from other families in Millbrook. They kept to themselves mostly, venturing into town only when necessary. The townspeople respected the Whitfields but also feared them, passing down stories through generations about strange lights and unexplained sounds coming from the manor. The mark on Lydia's neck had appeared just 3 days before the photograph was taken. She woke up one morning and found it there, like a tattoo that had formed overnight. It didn't hurt, she said, but it felt cold to the touch. When she looked in the mirror, the mark seemed to move slightly as if it were alive. The mark was perfectly symmetrical, with 5 long, thin fingers that seemed to wrap partially around her throat. At first, Lydia tried to hide the mark from her family, but it seemed to have a will of its own, becoming visible at unexpected moments. During family dinners, it would appear just above her collar. While reading in the library, it would peek out from behind her hair. The mark seemed to be announcing its presence, claiming ownership of Lydia in a way that terrified her. When Clara and Rose finally noticed the mark, they were shocked. The skin around it was slightly raised, as if the mark had been burned into her flesh. But there was no sign of injury or healing. It was as if the mark had always been there, waiting to reveal itself. The Whitfield curse, as the townspeople called it, was said to strike every few decades. It always chose someone young, always someone curious, and it always left its mark. Those who bore the mark would begin to change. They would know things about the past they had never learned. They would speak in voices that weren't their own. And sometimes they would disappear entirely, leaving only empty clothes behind. The curse had first appeared in the Whitfield family in 1823, when a young man named Jonathan Whitfield, aged 19, had woken up one morning with a strange mark on his wrist. Within days, he began speaking about events that had happened before his birth. He claimed to be possessed by the spirit of his grandfather. Jonathan would spend hours talking to empty air, having conversations with people only he could see. Jonathan's family tried everything they could think of to help him. They brought in doctors, priests, and even a traveling mystic. Nothing worked. Jonathan continued to slip further away from the present, becoming more lost in the memories of the dead. On a stormy night in October, he disappeared from his locked bedroom. The windows were still sealed, the door remained locked from the inside, but Jonathan was gone. All that remained were his clothes, folded neatly on his bed. The curse struck again in 1851, choosing Victoria Whitfield. She bore the mark on her shoulder and began exhibiting the same strange behaviors. Victoria would speak in the voice of various dead relatives, sharing secrets and knowledge that only they could have known. She described in perfect detail events that had happened decades before her birth. Victoria lasted longer than Jonathan, fighting the possession for nearly 3 months before she too vanished without a trace. The most recent occurrence before Lydia had been in 1878, when Edmund Whitfield, only 16, developed the mark on his forehead. His transformation was particularly disturbing because he was so young. He would spend hours talking to empty air, having conversations with deceased family members. Edmund would play games with invisible children and attend imaginary tea parties with long-dead relatives. Despite extensive searches after his disappearance, no trace of him was ever found. Each time the curse struck, it seemed to grow stronger. The possessed family members would last shorter periods before disappearing completely. The mark itself became more prominent with each occurrence, as if whatever force was behind it was gaining power with each victim it claimed. Lydia's transformation began slowly. The day after the photograph was taken, she started having dreams about people she had never met. In these dreams, she walked through Blackwood Manor, but it looked different. The wallpaper was a different pattern. The furniture was arranged in ways she had never seen. People in old-fashioned clothes moved through the rooms, talking about events that had happened before she was born. The dreams were so realistic that Lydia could smell different scents in each room, feel the texture of fabrics that no longer existed in the manor, and hear conversations as clearly as if she were actually there. When she woke up, she could remember every detail with perfect clarity. She could describe the faces of relatives who had died long before her birth. To her amazement, Lydia found that many of the things from her dreams were real. Hidden behind a loose stone in the library wall, she discovered love letters written by her great-great-grandmother. In the attic, she found a trunk containing clothes and jewelry that had belonged to relatives she had only seen in her dreams. Each discovery confirmed that her dreams were actual memories from the past. The mark on Lydia's neck began to grow darker with each passing day. What had started as a faint impression now looked like it had been burned into her skin. Sometimes late at night, Clara and Rose would see it glowing softly in the darkness. One morning, Lydia came down to breakfast speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. It was the voice of their great-grandmother, Beatrice Whitfield, who had died 50 years earlier. Lydia told them details about Beatrice's life that no one living could have known. She described Beatrice's wedding day, her children's births, and the night she disappeared from Blackwood Manor, never to be seen again. Thomas and Agnes Whitfield realized they needed help. The situation with Lydia was beyond anything they could handle on their own. They sent a telegram to Professor Nathaniel Grayson, a scholar from the university who studied unusual phenomena. Professor Grayson specialized in what he called temporal disturbances, moments when the past seemed to bleed into the present. While they waited for Professor Grayson to arrive, the situation at Blackwood Manor grew worse. Lydia began to speak in multiple voices, sometimes switching between them in the middle of a sentence. She would be their sweet sister one moment, then transform into someone else entirely the next. The voices belonged to different Whitfield family members from throughout history. There was Jonathan, the young man from 1823, who spoke with great sadness about his unfinished plans and dreams. Victoria, from 1851, would emerge with an angry voice, expressing resentment toward the family for not saving her. Edmund, the boy from 1878, would speak in a child's voice, crying for his mother and asking why he had been taken away. Clara and Rose tried desperately to help their sister remember who she was. They showed her photographs of their childhood together and reminded her of shared memories. Sometimes this worked, and Lydia would return to herself for a few hours. But the episodes became more frequent and lasted longer. Strange things began happening throughout the manor as Lydia's condition worsened. Doors would open and close by themselves, often with violent force. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways at all hours. Cold spots appeared in rooms that should have been warm, creating pockets of frigid air even on the hottest summer days. The supernatural activity was not limited to sounds and temperature changes. Objects would move on their own, appearing in different rooms from where they had been left. Books would be found open to specific pages that related to family history. Portraits on the walls seemed to watch people as they passed by. The manor's animals were also affected. The family dog would bark at empty corners and refuse to enter certain rooms, cowering in fear whenever it approached areas where the spiritual activity was strongest. Cats would hiss at invisible threats and spend most of their time hiding under furniture. Even the horses in the stable became nervous and difficult to handle. Clara and Rose took turns watching Lydia around the clock. They discovered that she was strongest and most like herself during the day, when sunlight filled the manor. But when the sun went down, the mark on her neck would glow brighter, and the voices of the past would become louder and more insistent in her mind. During one particularly disturbing episode, Lydia spent an entire night reenacting what appeared to be a formal dinner party from the past. She moved through the dining room setting places for invisible guests, curtsying to people who weren't there and engaging in polite conversation with empty air. The scene was both fascinating and terrifying to watch, as it became clear that Lydia was experiencing a complete event from the manor's past. The family began to notice that the supernatural activity in the manor followed a pattern that coincided with Lydia's episodes. When she was most deeply possessed, the ghostly phenomena would be at their strongest. Some of the servants quit without giving notice, leaving only hastily written notes about wanting to go somewhere safe. Professor Grayson finally arrived on a stormy evening in late August. his carriage pulling up to Blackwood Manor just as lightning began to split the dark sky. He was a thin man with prematurely gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. He carried a worn leather satchel filled with old books, strange instruments, and bottles of unusual substances that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The professor's equipment was unlike anything the family had seen before. He carried devices that looked like compasses, but pointed to things other than magnetic north, their needles spinning wildly whenever they were brought near areas of strong supernatural activity. He had bottles filled with various powders and liquids, each labeled with symbols instead of words. His books were bound in strange materials and written in languages that none of the family could identify. The professor spent his first evening at Blackwood Manor carefully observing Lydia during one of her possession episodes. He took detailed notes in a leather-bound journal, sketching the mark on her neck from different angles and recording everything she said in the various voices that spoke through her. When Lydia spoke in the voice of Jonathan Whitfield from 1823, Professor Grayson asked specific questions about the young man's experiences with the curse. Jonathan's spirit seemed eager to communicate with someone who understood his predicament, describing in chilling detail the gradual process of possession and the growing awareness that he was losing himself to the collective memory of the family. Professor Grayson spent the entire night reading through the extensive Whitfield family history. His research revealed disturbing patterns that the family had never noticed before. He discovered that the mark had appeared on family members with frightening regularity, always choosing someone young and curious, someone whose natural inquisitiveness made them vulnerable to the pull of the past. The professor's investigation uncovered evidence that the curse was connected to the land itself. He found references to an ancient burial ground that had been disturbed when Blackwood Manor was built in the early 1800s. The original construction had unknowingly been placed directly over a site that had been sacred to the indigenous people who had lived in the area for centuries. The displacement of these ancient remains had apparently awakened something that sought to reclaim what had been taken from it. The mark itself, according to the professor's research, was not just a symbol, but an actual doorway between the world of the living and what he termed the temporal echo chamber, a space where the memories and experiences of the dead continued to exist. The mark created a connection between these realms, allowing the echoes of the past to flow into the present world, using the marked person as a vessel. Professor Grayson explained to the terrified family that Lydia was being slowly possessed by the collective memory of everyone who had ever lived and died at Blackwood Manor. If they didn't act soon, Lydia would disappear entirely, becoming lost in the memories of those who had come before her. But Professor Grayson also revealed something that gave the family hope. Unlike the previous cases, Lydia still retained significant portions of her own personality and memories even during her possessed states. Her strong emotional bonds with her sisters were serving as powerful anchors to the present, preventing her from being completely absorbed into the past. The solution required a complex and dangerous ritual that would sever the connection between Lydia and the family's supernatural past. The professor warned them that the spirits wouldn't give up their hold easily. They had been waiting decades for another chance to experience life through a living person, and they would fight with desperate fury to maintain their connection to the world of the living. The ritual would need to be performed at precisely the right moment and would put everyone involved at serious risk. There were no guarantees of success, and failure could result in consequences far worse than Lydia's simple disappearance. On the night of the new moon, when the sky was at its darkest, the ritual began. Professor Grayson arranged candles in a specific pattern around Lydia, who sat in the center of the manor's main parlor. Clara and Rose stood on either side of their sister, each holding one of her hands. The professor began to chant in an ancient language, reading from a mysterious book that seemed to pulse with its own dark energy. As the ritual progressed, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Their breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began to form on the windows despite the warm August night. The candles flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to take on lives of their own. Lydia's eyes rolled back, showing only white, and she began to speak in multiple voices at once, creating a horrible chorus of past Whitfield family members, all trying to maintain their grip on the living world. The mark on Lydia's neck began to pulse with a bright, cold light that illuminated her pale skin with an otherworldly glow. It seemed to be fighting against the ritual, trying to maintain its hold on her. Professor Grayson raised his voice, chanting louder and more urgently. He sprinkled a mixture of salt and herbs around the circle, creating a barrier between Lydia and the spiritual forces trying to claim her. The walls of the parlor began to vibrate with increasing intensity. Books fell from shelves with tremendous crashes, and paintings rattled in their frames as if trying to escape their confines. Doors throughout the house could be heard slamming shut with violent force, and the sound of footsteps echoed from empty rooms as if an invisible crowd was gathering to witness the ceremony. Clara and Rose held tight to their sister's hands, even as supernatural forces tried to pull her away from them. They could feel Lydia being tugged in different directions, as if invisible hands were trying to drag her into the past. The sisters refused to let go, anchoring Lydia to the present moment through their love and determination. Their grip was her lifeline to the world of the living. Suddenly, the room filled with the sound of screaming, but it wasn't coming from any living person present. The voices belonged to the spirits of past Whitfield family members who were being forced to release their hold on Lydia. The temperature dropped even further, and the candles began to go out one by one, leaving them in near darkness broken only by the cold light emanating from Lydia's mark. Transparent figures could be seen moving in the shadows between the flickering candles. These were the spirits of the dead Whitfields, made briefly visible by the intensity of the ritual. They reached out toward Lydia with desperate gestures, their faces twisted with anguish and fury at being denied their chance to live again through her. The spiritual battle reached its climax as Professor Grayson spoke the final words of the ancient ritual. The very air seemed to tear apart around them, and a sound like breaking glass filled the room. The mark on Lydia's neck flared with blinding intensity one last time before beginning to fade. Professor Grayson placed his hand on Lydia's forehead and spoke a final series of words in the ancient language. There was a tremendous crash of sound like thunder, and a brilliant flash of light filled the room, temporarily blinding everyone present. When their vision cleared, Lydia had collapsed onto the floor, but she was breathing normally and peacefully. The mark on her neck had changed from black to a pale gray, and it no longer glowed with that cold, supernatural light. The temperature in the room began to return to normal, and the oppressive feeling of spiritual presence lifted like a weight being removed from their shoulders. The ritual had worked. Lydia was free. The ritual had worked, but not without consequences. Lydia was herself again, but she retained some memories from her possession. She could still remember details about long-dead family members, though these memories felt distant now, like something she had read in a book rather than experienced firsthand. The mark on her neck remained, but it was dormant, no longer serving as a doorway for the spirits of the past. Professor Grayson explained that the mark would always be there as a reminder and protection, showing that Lydia had already been touched by the family curse and could not be claimed again. The spiritual forces that had once threatened to consume her had been permanently severed from her soul. He advised the family to keep detailed records of the ritual and to pass this knowledge down to future generations, ensuring that they would be prepared if the curse ever manifested again. The professor left Blackwood Manor the next morning, taking copies of all the family documents with him for further study. He promised to continue his research into the supernatural phenomena that had plagued the Whitfield family for generations. Before departing, he gave them a small bag of the salt and herb mixture that had been used in the ritual, instructing them to sprinkle it around the manor once a month to keep unwanted spirits at bay. Life at Blackwood Manor slowly returned to normal, though the family was forever changed by their ordeal. Lydia recovered her strength and normal personality, but she was quieter now, more thoughtful and introspective. She had seen the fate that had befallen other family members and understood how close she had come to disappearing into the past forever. The experience had given her a profound appreciation for the present moment and the precious bonds she shared with her sisters. Clara and Rose became even more protective of their middle sister, watching carefully for any signs that the curse might return. The three sisters grew closer through their shared ordeal, bound together by the knowledge of what they had faced and overcome. Their connection, which had always been strong, became unbreakable after they had literally fought supernatural forces to save one another. Years passed, and the sisters grew older. Clara married a doctor from a neighboring town and moved away, though she visited Blackwood Manor regularly to check on her family. Rose became a teacher in Millbrook and chose to stay at the manor to help care for their aging parents. Lydia never married, choosing instead to dedicate her life to studying the family history and preparing for the possibility that the curse might strike again in future generations. The photograph taken in 1903 remained in the family archives, a haunting reminder of the summer when the past had tried to reclaim one of their own. Visitors would sometimes notice the strange mark on Lydia's neck in the photograph, but the family would simply say it was a birthmark or a flaw in the old camera equipment. Only they knew the true story of what that mark represented and the price that had been paid to keep Lydia in the world of the living. Lydia lived to be an old woman and never experienced another supernatural episode. The mark on her neck faded over the years, becoming barely visible except in certain lights. She spent her later years writing down everything she could remember about the family curse and the ritual that had saved her, creating a detailed record that could help future generations face similar threats. When Lydia finally passed away peacefully at age 87, the mark on her neck had disappeared completely. She was buried in the Whitfield family cemetery behind Blackwood Manor. The photograph from 1903 was placed in her coffin, finally reuniting her with the moment when her life had changed forever. The Whitfield family continues to live at Blackwood Manor to this day, though the curse has not appeared again. Each generation is told the story of the three sisters and the summer of 1903, ensuring that the knowledge of how to fight the family curse is never lost. The current residents report no unusual spiritual activity, though they continue to sprinkle Professor Grayson's protective mixture around the house once a month just to be safe. So the next time you see an old family photograph, take a closer look at the details. Sometimes what appears to be a simple portrait is actually a record of something much more significant. The three Whitfield sisters in their matching white dresses may look identical at first glance, but that strange mark on Lydia's neck tells a story of courage, sacrifice, and the power of family bonds to overcome even the most supernatural of threats.